Annie O'Connell is a busy mum of 4 boys, a family physician in New York City, and now the author of The Lunar Codex, Book 1 of the Codex Chronicles. And she's with us here just now. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing, Toby?
I'm doing smashing, thank you. So this book, The Lunar Codex, of course, Book 1 from the Codex Chronicles, how would you describe what it's about?
So it's more of a coming of age book. It initially
Yeah.
started out, it was more supposed to be seeing how young teenagers kind of traverse life. And as
Yeah.
it went along, it started taking more of a fantasy type of role. It's really, I have 4 boys. So the main characters were kind of a smorgasbord of my boys all mixed into each of the characters.
Yeah.
But it starts off with our main character learning about his history, where his parents had died unexpectedly when he was 3, and his struggles through life of trying to figure out who he is as he's being moved around a lot because of the aunt and uncle that had adopted him, and the frustration that he was experiencing because he was never really able to make any friends.
Yeah.
And then eventually he hits a point in life where he's at this new location, he is making friends, and then his entire life turns upside down. And things kind of get a little crazy from there. So just
Yeah.
as things seem to be getting normal, they take a completely different turn for him.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that some of the characters are based on your own boys, because there are such strong characters in the book that you actually believe that they exist in real life.
Yeah, each of them, really, Jace, which is the main character of the book, is a little bit of a tweak between my 2 younger boys. So I have a 16-year-old who, when I first started writing the book, was 14, about to turn 15, hence the reasoning for the aging.
Yeah.
A lot of his mannerisms, his characteristics are in Jace himself. At the time, I also had my 5-year-old, who at the time was 3 years old, which is why his story kind of started when he was 3. But his appearance is really based off of the physical appearance of my 3-year-old. Marcus, who is his best friend, is definitely a combination of my 2 older boys with their sarcastic, witty, you never quite know what they're going to come out with, but it's
Yeah.
usually very entertaining personality.
What inspired the specific plot? Because it's actually a really interesting idea, isn't it?
It had taken many different forms, but really I was sitting, I'm a doctor by trade, and
Yeah.
it was during the middle of COVID, and I was very stressed out, and there was a lot of stuff happening, and it was the first time that we'd really taken the chance. We'd gotten a pool for our backyard, and I was sitting in the backyard with my kids, and I was watching my now 15 and then, or my now 16 and my now 3-year-old playing in the pool, and the 2 of them were being what boys are, just torturing each other. And I had teased with my husband. I said, if it's a full moon tonight, I swear one of them's going to change. And as I was sitting there, the thought just kept kind of running in my head and running in my head and running in my head. And I said, I'll be right back. And I ran into my house, I grabbed my computer, and I started plotting out this plot line. It was initially, like I said, the werewolf aspect had kind of come into my thought process, but I never really thought of it that way. It was just more going to be a coming of age for a teenager. And then I went back in. Me and my son, my 16-year-old, we always listen to fantasy novels anyway. So it seemed like the right path for us to take.
Yeah, it is quite an interesting mix of genres, I suppose, the book, isn't it? Because it starts out really as any sort of coming of age thing. You wouldn't expect that this werewolf twist would happen later on.
Yeah, it was as I was going on and the more I was thinking about it, it definitely started making more sense to go in that direction. Because like I said, me and my 16-year-old, we listened to those books all the time. And I said, this just makes more sense. This is just who we are. This is what we listen to. This is what we read. And it made more sense, and it made the story that much more interesting and more fun to write and to run through. And it sort of opened possibilities for where to go with it. And I really enjoyed once I kind of went definitely into that pathway.
And how long did the book take you to write?
So since this was my very first book, it was in the middle of COVID, it took me about 6.5, 7 months to write. But with the editing and everything, yeah, I'd say probably a solid 6.5, 7 months.
Yeah. So if you were to write a second book, which I'm assuming you're going to do because it's called book one, do you think it would be quicker the second time around?
The second book is actually finished. I'm
Ooh.
polishing off the last chapter of the second book. We definitely start delving into more of his new life. He ends up with a new set of characters that he's dealing with, a new set of circumstances with his old crew that are, still with him. But yes, the second book is finished. My goal is to have that one out by the end of September, early October.
Wow. So that's very soon indeed then, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
And were there any characters in the book that weren't inspired by your children or people you know in real life?
Yes, I mean, a lot of the characters. So the uncle character has a lot of flavor of my father in there, a lot of his mannerisms, a lot of his personality, his silly, goofy, we call him Steve-isms out a lot. As my husband was reading, he's like, wow, that's your dad. Yep, that's your dad. The main character's love interest, Izzie, her father reminds me a lot of my husband. My husband is very analytical and he kind of, very streamlined. And in the book, the character is a retired corrections officer. So he's very by the book. He watches, he's very in tune with what's happening. And if something doesn't make sense, he's really kind of on it. That's my husband. You see a little bit more of that in book two. We get to kind of weed out Izzie's parents a little bit better in book two than we did in book one. It's more trying to get us used to our main characters first in book one.
Assuming your husband has read the book, did you tell him that character was sort of based on him, or did you let him work it out for himself?
He did read it, and he was working it out himself. I mean, as he was going through it, even, other people, situations that I've been in that I incorporated into the book, people that maybe they were like, oh, I know exactly where you got that from. Oh, I know what that was all about. I can totally see where you were talking about with this. Yes, he was picking up on different things, and he'd kind of look at me and give me like a little smile, like, I get that.
And what about your children? Do they like the book?
So my 16-year-old has attempted multiple times. He's a typical 16-year-old. He's got so many other things. He's not actually read it. My older ones have. They did like it. My 5-year-old obviously is not. He's still too young for it. But my older ones did.
Yeah, I suppose they will read it eventually when they find the time.
Yeah, I mean, they're all like in their own world, but the two older ones, I have a 26-year-old and a 20-year-old, they have, and the girlfriends have too, actually. So that was nice too.
I suppose it's quite hard to get them to read a book, isn't it? Even if it is your own book, because reading books at that age, and any age really, is quite important.
Oh, it absolutely is. Like I said, me and my son, we do a lot of traveling. So when we have to do the back and forth, we usually use audiobooks. And that was my way of trying to enforce him to read. So we would find different genres that I knew that he liked. And one of them was fantasy, young adult. So we've been doing that probably since he's about 10 years old. So like the past 5-6 years, we read audiobooks all the time.
Yeah. And I suppose particularly a book like this, it could be quite important for some young children to read it or whatever age, because part of the story is that Jace has been moving house a lot, so hasn't really had any friends long term. And maybe a lot of children can relate to that if they've been in a similar situation, or maybe for whatever reason they find it hard to make friends.
Absolutely. As a young child, I did do a lot of moving, so I could kind of relate to his plight in life, where he was constantly shifting and moving about. And yes, it is sometimes difficult being that new person to walk in, and how do you make those friends when there's already that group that's already been established. But I think, with him, it was seeing that him just being true to himself, he was able to make those friends. He was able to make those connections, and he was accepted very quickly. So, sometimes the fear of the unknown is what holds you back, as opposed to what would actually happen if you just opened yourself up and allowed yourself to take those steps into that great unknown.
Yeah, especially in such a small town as well. It's quite an achievement to make friends when there's not much choice.
Absolutely. I mean, I kind of set him up where on the block with 3 people. But it's he did end up, expanding, and he was able to quickly make friends. And, that again was kind of reminiscent to my own life, that going to different schools and meeting different people. And, initially you're kind of shy. You don't know quite where you fit in, but just opening yourself up and allowing yourself that opportunity. And you quickly do become friends with people. Most people are very amenable to, getting to know who you are and getting to know your story, and then, becoming friends. So yeah, I would definitely tell people, if you're nervous, don't be, just open yourself up.
Yeah. Now, I always like to talk about the cover of books, and yours is pretty cool because, of course, you've got Jace on the cover and then a werewolf in the background with the moon. It kind of gives you a good idea about what's going on.
Yeah, that cover has gone through a couple of different changes, but this
Yeah.
one, my cover designer absolutely hit it out of the park with it. It was amazing. Really, the only thing that I had her do was just add in that red tone just to kind of give it a little bit more of a pop. But yes, I mean, everybody says, oh, the cover doesn't make a difference. It does.
Yeah.
You really want to, it gives you a flavor of what exactly is happening, that it's not just the straight, regular, run of the mill, coming of age, young adult, that there is some fantasy aspects to it. But no, I mean, the character on it, the whole positioning of him, she did an amazing job.
Of course, the cover is so important, as you mentioned. Maybe a lot of people forget about that, don't they? They spend a lot of time thinking about the content of the book, as they quite rightly should, but forget about everything else.
Absolutely. My initial cover I had, it was a very good cover, but it really didn't explain what was happening. And even my husband, when he had seen it, he was like, it looks like you're giving a nature book. It was pretty much just a wolf on the cover, and it had a ring behind it. And he was like, there's a moon, but he was like, I don't understand what exactly it is that's supposed to be happening here. So when we revamped the book itself, and then had a new cover design done, yes, this one was 1,000 times better. You absolutely know that it's around, geared towards a young male, and that there's some sort of fantasy aspect to it, with the wolf being in the back. Kind of get a feeling that there's going to be some sort of werewolf action happening there.
Yeah.
But no, it's much, much, much more detailed.
Yeah. And of course, this story, I can really imagine it as a film or TV series. Is that something that you would like to happen?
I would absolutely love to have that happen. Talking with my husband, whenever I would go and I'd write it, he'd be like, how do you come up with this stuff? And I would say a lot of it, it's almost like watching it happen in my head, and I'm just transcribing what I'm seeing happen. So, I mean, I could vividly see some of the scenes in my head. I can imagine how it would look on film. Because I want to do it in a couple of different books. I plan on doing 5 books for this particular series.
Wow.
Maybe even like a TV series might be better for it. But yes, I can absolutely, I think everybody that writes, that's the one thing that they always think of, how this would look on TV, who would play what character, and what it would look like, and how it would be interpreted. But yes, I would love to see it on TV or film.
Is it a good idea to think about it as TV when you're writing? Because on the one hand, maybe that helps you be very descriptive, but then I suppose at the end of the day, you're writing a book, not a screenplay, so maybe you have to forget about that.
You do. I mean, again, it's, like, I'm not giving direction as to where they're going, but it's, I know for me, whenever I read, I always like to have as much description as I can about scenery and whatnot. So I kind of have an idea, is it fall? Is it spring? Is it cold? Is it not? What are they wearing? What do they look like? Obviously, no matter what you do, you're always going to formulate what the character is going to look like in your head, and what the scene is going to look like in your head. But I like to have enough imagery behind it that I can really kind of start making this tactile picture for me to really feel and sense and smell as I'm reading. So I like to do it as I'm writing as well, too.
Yeah. And of course, you mentioned that when you were writing it, it just sort of came to you. Were you surprised by some of the twists in there yourself?
Yes. There was a lot of, I mean, my husband jokes because I have a whole section in my computer where I could probably write 3 books just from the chapters that I've actually pulled out, because, it just wasn't flowing the way that I wanted. But, you'd sit there and you'd start writing, and then I'd go back and I'd read and I'd be like, ooh, that makes more sense if I go this way as opposed to that way. So I was a little bit of, when you're writing, they call you either a pantser or a plotter. I would try to plot. I'd kind of have a rough skeleton of it, but a lot of it became pantser writing. Just as I was sitting there, I'd be like, no, this makes more sense. Or the conversation would turn in a different direction than what I had anticipated it going. And I'm like, I like this much better. And, just kind of run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're not writing, what kind of things do you like to get up to?
My family and I, we love to travel. So, we haven't really been able to do any of our extensive traveling that we usually do.
Yeah.
But, we definitely like to head down to Florida. A lot of our family is down there. So we actually just got back from my sister-in-law's wedding.
Wow.
So we were down there for a week. I enjoy hanging out with my friends. We have a lot of different organizations that are in our town. So my kids are very active in them. So constantly going to sports functions, and we have back deck parties with our friends that are out here too. I like to crochet. Don't do it as much as I used to, because usually my free time I'm breaking out my computer and writing anymore. Watching movies and, listening to our audiobooks.
Yeah. I suppose crochet is something that can pass the time away.
Yes, it does. For me, that was part of my, it was very cathartic as well while I was going through COVID, just something that repetitive motion just kind of help calm you down and relax yourself.
Yeah.
And then I found my writing was a little bit more enjoyable than even what I could create with crocheting. So like I said, my writing kind of took over.
Yeah. I suppose they're both things that you can do to relax. But then again, is writing a little bit more stressful because you have to focus a bit more maybe and come up with ideas?
Yes and no. For me, because I've been working with this group of characters now for almost 2 years, it's almost like when I pull out my computer and I start working again, it's almost like rekindling a friendship and kind of catching up with where we were. So yes, it can get very stressful. My husband always tells me, like, relax. There's no, you don't have to put this much pressure on yourself. Yeah. But for me, it's, I want to see how it ends. I want to get them to that end point. I want to follow through with their story. It's a little bit of my part A, type A personality. Yeah. So I will put stress on myself to try to get scenes done and catch up and make sure that I'm keeping the flow going. But in the end, I really do enjoy, and once I go back and I reread what I've done, I'm like, wow, this is very enjoyable for me. I like watching people read my book or hearing their stories at the end of, oh, wow, I really liked what you did here. It was amazing. The twist was amazing. That's, I think, the most enjoyable part of putting something like this out there, is hearing what other people think of what you've pretty much dedicated half a year of your life into doing.
Yeah, absolutely. That must be quite an important part of it, because if you spent half a year writing a book and nobody mentioned anything about it to you, it wouldn't really motivate you to do another one, would it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it would probably be a little upsetting, a little crushing, but people seem to be enjoying it that I've talked to. I haven't had any real negative criticism about the book. Everybody seems to enjoy the flow of it. Yeah. So it definitely gave me nice, good motivation to continue and move on to book 2. And I'm starting the outline for book 3. And like I said, I have a rough idea where I'm going through to book 5, but taking them book by book as I go.
And do you know timescale about books 3, 4, and 5, or are you just gonna see how it goes?
Book 2 took me a little bit longer than I wanted to, because I was trying to relaunch book 1. Yeah. But now that I'm kind of getting the process down of what I need to do and how I have to have it done, I'm hoping that I can have book 3 by like around Christmas time, book 4 by like the springtime, book 5 by like the summertime. So I'm trying to, as I'm going, trying to keep them moving a little bit faster. It's like I said, the first book was it was a learning experience, trying to figure out what I had to do, who I had to talk to, who was responsible for what. But now that I'm kind of getting the hang of what needs to be done and the process and everything, it's a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, where are we able to find book 1, The Lunar Codex?
You can find it on Amazon, Audible, Google Play, iTunes, and Barnes & Noble.
Excellent. Well, many thanks for coming on today. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you as well.